Good evening. My name is Grigory Marchenko. I will be moderating this session. I will ask all speakers to take their seats. We are going to have another couple of persons joining us. I always feel a great respect for people who attend the last session in the conference or Congress, because quite a lot of people go away immediately after the big bosses go away. We also tend to want to leave after lunch. So only the most conscientious, most interested people stay for the last session, and also the employees of the organization that has organized the event. But I actually believe that we're going to have a very exciting session with very good speakers. Not all of them are here yet, so I'm hoping that they'll be able to join us in the coming minutes. This whole subject is very exciting and very complicated. There's no country, large country in the world, and more so not a single alliance of countries or union of countries have been able to solve this problem. So what is harmonious development? We have a huge difference in development between North Europe and South Europe, and this has been in place for several hundreds of years, and there are a whole lot of different reasons to that, lying in the plane of culture, economy, social issues. I recently read a research, so there are differences in development level in different Italian towns and cities in the north of Italy, who fought in the 12th century against the Holy Roman Empire. Some of them won, others chose to join this Holy Roman Empire. And so 100 years down the line, there is still a serious difference in social development level between these cities, however striking it may feel. So we certainly have such problems in our own countries, like in Kazakhstan, for instance. The average salary in Ataraus region, where oil and gas production goes, is the highest, is 5 times higher than in another region. So within the same country, it's a huge difference. On the other hand, if we said that our trade and economic collaboration with Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan were to go better, the level of development in the Jambul region, which is on the border with these countries, would have been higher. So we're facing the question of, on the one hand, how to provide the harmonious development of within the country, and on the other hand, between the countries in our economic union. There's another aspect to it. What role in all this could be played by international multilateral financial organizations and development institutions? We are all happy to take all sorts of projects, and the usual process is like this. A borrower comes to us, we find a good project, so we attract other financial institutions to fund it. We have a whole lot of joint projects with EBRD, the European Development Bank, and the New Development Bank, but this is project-based. Project-based activity. Of course, it's important, but the project-based activities should belong to the common goal of economic development. So for the next Congress, maybe it'll make sense to invite more international institutions to have a discussion among them. So in this sense, the division of labor, so to speak, among such organizations would have been of more interest. We, for instance, are members of the European Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, our Eurasian Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank. Of course, the World Bank is also operating in my country together with its development organizations. Also, the Asian Bank for the Development of Infrastructure, the New Development Bank. Any country in our region has relations with at least, please proceed, we've already started, has relations with a minimum of 6 and sometimes 7 different development institutions. Maybe in the long term, it would make more sense if they were to specialize. Some institution should focus on healthcare, another one on education, yet another one would cater for the financial sector, and the World Bank, as the main organization, would be responsible for institutional development and orchestration of all these different development institutions. But coming back to the original subject, what are the goals? Of course, it includes the development of human capital, creating a good environment for social infrastructure development, financial sector development, because now the level of financial intermediarship is not high enough. Also, the situation here, and we're also interested in creating conditions for the grey economy to legalize. So, therefore, I would like the speakers today to address these questions and other aspects that they would like to pay attention to. So our first speaker will be Timur Maximov, Deputy Minister of Finance in the Russian Federation, but because he's not yet here, my next speaker is Evgeny Zhukov, General Director of the Regional Department for Central and Western Asia in the Asian Development Bank. Do we have the connection? Mr. Maximov can connect when he joins us. It's just I haven't seen him. Can we get a connection with Manila? All right, I'm hoping that they will give me a signal that he's online. Is he online? Yes, good. Hello. Hello, Grigory. How are you doing? How are you doing, Evgeny? Haven't seen you for a long time. Yes, 13 years. Last time we saw each other was in Manila at the annual meeting of the Eurasian Bank for Development. Good that you remember. I hope you heard what I mentioned. The Asian Development Bank is a key partner in the area of development. We remember the time when your biggest challenge was fighting poverty, and as opposed to other international financial institutions, your bank has always been paying attention to harmonious social development. So we'd like to hear your viewpoint on how we could achieve this harmonious development in our region, and what role could be played by development banks in that, including yours. Thank you for your question, and thank you for the invitation to attend the session. It's a great honor for the Asian Development Bank and for me personally. Last year and this year as well, the focus of our attention was related with the COVID epidemic. And last year, Central Asia economies fell by 2%. And this year, we are expecting growth by about 4.5%. But the risks are still there. The Asian Development Bank, ADB, has been supporting Central Asia and Caucasus countries in 2020. And this year to offer loans and grants for emergency assistance, budget support, and funding the purchase of vaccines, in addition to the projects that had been programmed for this pandemic. Before this pandemic. This year, we are planning to offer grants and loans to Central Asia to the tune of $1.6 billion US. And last year, about $2 billion were spent on fighting COVID. The total active portfolio in Central Asia and South Caucasus is about $11 billion US. Of course, we're very active in Central Asia, especially in institutional development, in improving the business environment and development of human potential. We have a strategy that's based on what we call a single ADB to provide sovereign funding for the governments and non-sovereign funding for private organizations. This includes operations to improve investment climate, to create new markets, to foster funding and preparing private-government partnership. So we are doing everything to improve the investment climate, including project operations, project-based operations in the private sector, and also taking part in preparing a background for the private-government partnership. Let me give you several examples. For instance, in Kazakhstan, we support the private sector in renewable power sources, agribusiness and logistics. We've also provided support in healthcare and in improving the environment for a private-government partnership. In Uzbekistan last year, we signed loans up to $17 million US to create a special purpose vehicle to create a 100 megawatt solar power station that will be the first private government project for renewable power. We also provide consultancy for the modernization of a heating system in Tashkent, and we envisage a 1 gigawatt power system. To improve the regulatory environment, EDB is also drafting amendments to the regulations in private government projects. As Central Asia, countries are accelerating their migration to market economy. The bank is providing support for the stability of the market. We have several programs for structural change and for technology assistance to Central Asian country. We support the development of a more powerful, more open financial sector and providing better access for small and medium-sized enterprises. For instance, in Armenia, we are helping to improve efficiency of financial risk management. We are supporting responsible private government initiatives and also provide support for the management of government debt. The support of human capital through supporting and funding the education and creating a digital economy foundation are also supported by ADB, including those in the COVID pandemic conditions. We're actively working with the populations of the Central Asian countries. For instance, in Armenia, we're providing technical support to the Ministry of Education, Science, Culture and Sports to prepare a platform for distance learning in a specific pandemic-related project. We also have a separate project of improving the earthquake-proofness of schools and educational institutions in Armenia. We're also providing professional education. Also in Tajikistan, we're supporting the programs of technical, professional, and vocational education. Like we issued a grant, $30 million to improve the opportunities for Tajikistani women for employment. In addition to those investments, as part of Central Asian collaboration programs, we prepared a digital strategy up until the year 2030. A lot of attention is going to be paid to fintech and the improvement of systems for startups in all countries of Central Asia, which of course includes Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. Going to a more specific question of how the bank is supporting regulatory reform and technology transformations in the region. I would like to give you several examples of such support. In Kazakhstan, we are helping to fund projects of renewable power generation. We provided several loans to the private sector. For instance, we are funding the Baikonur solar project approved in 2017, and also a green project to the tune of several $1 million that envisages building innovative solar power stations. In 2020, we approved technology assistance or technical assistance to improve the legislation on renewable power generation. We're also consulting the government of Kazakhstan to provide services to accumulate energy, to create the smart grid. As to Armenia, in September 2021, ADB and Armenian Power Grid signed a deal to the tune of $250 million to provide reliable power supply in Armenia, especially in provinces. And it's expected that thanks to the investment, the energy efficiency and energy security of the country will grow considerably. This project is also focused on the reconstruction of the existing infrastructure to the current technology standards. That will improve the opportunities for automatic accounting of power generation. In Kyrgyzstan, we are supporting energy sector reforms, developing a national plan for the energy sector. That's in addition to our large investment in the rehabilitation of Tagosk hydropower plant. We are also active in Tajikistan. We will work with the government of Tajikistan for the restructuring and energy reform in the sector, improving the financial sustainability. Lastly, I'd like to note that regional development plays an important role, may play an important role in the harmonization of development in Central Asia. And ADB is prepared to offer any assistance possible in these endeavors. Of course, historically, we have invested most of our resources into the infrastructure. More than 75% of our projects were in this area. But in the recent years, especially since the start of the pandemic, we started to pay more attention to the social sector, especially healthcare and education. And we are planning to continue doing that in the future. Thank you.
Okay, you did your timing well. I would like to ask you to think about things which I mentioned in the entrance, in the introductory word. I hope that next time you will join us at the Congress personally. So this problem of distributing efforts and, on the other hand, coordination between international financial organizations and development organizations towards harmonious social and economic development, this is something that your bank could be a leader in. We know that this is all be already done through the central system, and more can be done. And our expectation is that your projects could find a better place in this joint effort. Next question is to Timur Maximov, Deputy Minister of Finance of the Russian Federation. As you all know, recently the 5-year strategy was adopted, and at the same time our colleagues from the Eurasian Social Development Fund are working on their strategy. And given the priorities set by those two documents, as a representative of the major bank and fund, how do you view their strategic objectives? Of course, we can compare EDB to the World Bank in our region, while the EFSD plays the role of IMF within our region. Do you think they should cooperate more, or on the other hand, each of them should focus on its own agenda and you will just play the role of shareholders? It works, but you should sit closer to the microphone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this question, which is very relevant today. But I think in asking this question, you gave part of the answer. It is true that today we view these two institutions in the same way as we view the World Bank and the IMF. To a great extent, this is our view as well. This year was special. Last summer, we adopted our midterm strategy as EDB, and at the same time, we launched the same process within the Eurasian Fund. The purpose of this is, I think, obvious to everyone. Well, first, both institutions are recognized actors on the Eurasian in the Eurasian space. They concentrate all the experience that was accumulated in these activities, and of course in the middle term their work should be synchronized. I will share some of our ideas about developing these two institutions and our expectations from the strategies of both of them. Our approach to EDB was as follows. We looked at the situation as it develops in the region, and we realized that there are multiple international financial institutions operating in the region and multiple development banks. So it seems that a lot of serious players are playing on a relatively small market, and EDB is one of them. When we compared these players in terms of their capacity, all the international development institutions have the total of about 25 billion as the capacity, and EDB can offer about 12 billion. And in none of the country cases, it's among the top 3 development institutions. It doesn't make sense to maintain an institution unless it can compete in a very competitive environment. So we set for ourselves, and for the bank as well, the task of becoming the leader within the medium term in the countries of the region. And ideally, it should be the leader, because the demand on the recipient countries' part is huge. So the country is facing a choice of banks, but what they want is the final product, not put it together from different pieces. But they face normally a complex project, the feasibility study ready. It's not a brownfield case. They should be able to offer a turnkey solution. So we made emphasis on EDB because all the countries involved are important shareholders. They have good political relations between them, and there is a process of integration which is transparent to all of them. So they should be a stimulus for the EDB to operate. So we thought it could be made into a very clear and workable scenario. This is what our midterm strategy comes from. The goal of the bank is to become the leader in the project activities within the region of its operation. The bank should become an institution putting together projects starting from scratch, pooling projects, taking advantage of the technical assistance fund, so that major international financial organizations as well as retail and institutional investors could operate under the same name of EDB and invest comfortably in the countries of operation. This is the bank's view. Then we looked at our fund, which has been operating for years and has proven to be quite effective. For decades, it's been supporting the regional countries in addressing their social and economic issues. And we realized that the fund and the bank should not just work in synergy, but they should be fully complementary and should share the same tools in doing their job. We are in the middle of our journey. We've gone through a number of iterations with the fund, and we discussed that with the shareholders. Now the matter is taken to the high political level. But the fund and the bank are complementary. They do not compete in terms of their niches. And of course, the main tool should be economic stabilization implemented through anti-crisis programs and credits. But not only that, we realize that apart from that, the fund has the grant window and investment loans with easy terms, which help countries to deal with the bottlenecks, to reach high levels of profitability, which development banks cannot otherwise help. So this market niche, so to speak, will enable the bank and fund to work in harmony through minor adjustments. On the other hand, we keep hearing from our colleagues in the Eurasian Economic Union and the Eurasian Economic Commission a demand for catch-up development tools. Okay, we have wonderful tools. We need to adjust them and fine-tune them properly. And these institutions have good people in place, and they have their mechanisms. We just need to use this European fund, Eurasian fund capacity to put that into good work. Now, without taking more of your time, I'm ready to answer your questions. So in terms of timing, do you know when the strategy for EFSD will be finalized and fully approved? I think next year we will have a strategy that will be fully approved by all the member countries. My next question is to Dmitry Volvich, Deputy Head of the Ministry of Economic Development of Russia. In line with the Eurasian Economic Integration plan, which extends over the next 5 years, will determine the shape of the Union. So the strategy 2025, how will it help the development of social and human capital in the Eurasian space? Thank you for this question, for this opportunity to join the Congress and this integration agenda. Of course, the integration within the post-Soviet space, especially within the Eurasian region, is our strategic goal. But in my brief presentation, I would like to prove the point that integration, in this case, is not a political program. The integration we're aiming at, in particular through the 2025 strategy, is a very clear and pragmatic mechanism for each member country to make it more competitive, to help it grow its economy and improve the well-being of its population, taking advantage of the integration effects that are given in the cooperation formats. Based on our expert estimates, integration has already contributed to economic growth and mutual trade of the member countries. Between 2016 and 2020, the growth of real GDP of the Union totally was 3.7%. Out of that, 0.54 percentage points, which is a big portion, is accounted for by the change that is achieved through the integration of member country economies. In 2021, this integration effect is estimated in 0.12 percentage points for the country economies. The largest integration effect is felt by a relatively smaller economies, in particular for Belarus. This effect is plus 4 percentage points. In GDP for Armenia and Kyrgyzstan, it's plus 1.2 percentage points. The global economic crisis of last year resulted in reducing trade by 13.6% between the countries, while the integration processes mitigated that loss by 5.1 percentage points. Without integration, the drop will be much more pronounced. Based on the Ministry of the Economy's estimates, in 2021, mutual trade between the Union countries will be $64 billion. That is 6.5% growth compared to 2020 and 4% growth compared to the successful pre-COVID 2019. I also believe that integration is and plays an important role in that growth. As for strategic areas that we have adopted within our 2025 strategy, what is important about it, apart from emphasis on speeding up the economic content, we added to it social and humanitarian integration. This is what the Union was lacking in the first stage of its development, which was only seen as a trade and economic union. This strategy identifies such new areas as education, tourism and sport and health, which is apart from just social development component, it also helps all the citizens to increase their well-being. We also agreed about jointly developing infrastructure projects, creating transportation corridors, international and intercontinental as well, that will fully implement the strategic potential of the Union. We agreed on joint high-tech projects that will become symbols of Eurasian integration. We agreed about creating a single information portal and also to harmonize the public health system that make health services more accessible and available to citizens of the member countries. We also agreed on developing joint Eurasian tourism routes. 7.5 million Russian tourists prefer to go to CIS countries for their vacations as a priority. The Union also develops gradually the human development projects in order to enable free movement of highly skilled workforce between the countries. We are working on two documents. One is international agreement on mutual recognition of university degrees and documents of scientific recognition. Science and research is an area which is generally more open to synergy and cooperation. We are planning to open more representative offices of universities. CIS countries have 35 branches of Russian universities opened. The Russian Cinema Institutions opened its first overseas branch in the city of Tashkent. That was an important event. Tashkent is in Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is an observer country, so 35 branches, the figure that I mentioned before, is for all the CIS countries, and out of them 14 are located in Uzbekistan, which is observer country, which means we have great potential for Russian universities to because they are increasingly in demand by people in our partner countries, which means that those universities can play a more important role on their markets. Despite the pandemic, there is inter-university cooperation continues. More than 146,000 people from the different countries of the Union are trained in Russia, and Kazakhstan is the leader in that. There were about 19,000 people in the pre-COVID situation. 63,000 students from Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan 13 to 15,000, and Armenia and Moldova both have about 4,500 students trained in Russia. Until 2015, there was a continuous increase in the number of students who are coming to get trained on an annual basis. The share of educational migrants from EAEU countries to Russia grew by 6% and now 26% of them are people coming from member countries. Compared to 2019, this is 6% increase. You have 1 minute left. The most pronounced growth is shown in Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan is the leader. Before COVID, Russian universities were training more than 90,000 students every year. As of today, we're facing the goal to increase the mutual trust between the countries and the peoples who are populating the Eurasian region. Russia now has a systemic mechanism to set up a favorable, conducive environment for people to study and live. Russia needs to be a country attractive for workers and students, and the initiative that I mentioned specifies the methodologies that will also offer to be replicated in all the 5 countries of the Union. We have mobile applications, such as working in EAEU and travel without COVID, that will help people in our countries to work together using digital technologies. That is what will capitalize to expand and promote our economies. For the lack of time, let me just cite some figures. This year, the Eurasian Economic Union is in the positive trend in all the key indicators. Joint efforts enabled us to reach our targets of last year. In January this year, the GDP of the whole Union grew 4.1% compared to 2020, which was 1.6% higher than the pre-COVID 2019. Also, by this time, we have eliminated more than 30% of identified boundaries, obstacles to mutual trade. The economic effect of that enabled the total economic effect such as big as 1.5% of GDP increase. That covers 1.5 billion mutual trade in goods, and there is a potential for further increase in GDP of total GDP by 1.2%. This is why we give so much attention to this systemic identification and elimination of trade barriers and obstacles. In conclusion, let me say that it's only through unity and mutual trust that we can achieve successful development of the Union, not only in the decade that started, but for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmitry. You cited a lot of numbers, but not all of them. Well, that was my suspicion. I fully share your last point that trust needs to be built upon to do everything for the better of our countries. Now I have a question to Sergei Glaziev, member of Collegium, a minister for integration and macroeconomics in the Eurasian Economic Commission. Our heads of state set a goal for the GDP to grow by 5.5%. How do you think we're going to achieve that? And on the whole, based on the fact that the subject of this session is harmonious socio-economic development of our union, which includes the point of catching up development of small countries. So what do you think about that? I forgot to say, we have 7 minutes for presentation. So it's not that I'm a cruel person, that I'm interrupting you. You've asked a very important question, because harmonious social economic development should be proactive. We can't provide for the harmony in the development if we're lagging behind the world. 5.5%, it's a guidance number approved for the previous year. We are not achieving it this year, 4.5%, even though the world is moving at 5.6%. So 5.5%, mind you, is the minimally required level of economic growth in GDP, in terms of GDP, in order to at least stay in the same place in the worldwide ranking where we are today. For the next year, the forecast is not very good, 3.8% in EAEU, whereas worldwide is 4.6%. So we're lagging behind. And 3.1, that is, we're lagging behind by the factor of 1.5. So when we're justifying the number of 5.5%, so we were proceeding from the existing resources for the economic growth. You know, economic growth is provided for by 5 factors. The main factor is fixed capital. Then the capacity utilization today is a bit higher than 60%. And for the key industries, like engineering, less than 40%. If we provide a higher utilization of the existing capacity, we can raise the bar by at least those 1.5% a year that we're lacking. Dmitry talked about initiatives in the social sphere where we're building a unified environment for labor. Today we have a common labor market that allows balancing the labor resource market. We don't have restriction of that. We don't have restriction on raw materials, 80% of which we export. We don't have restrictions on the flight of the braid rain. See, we don't really have problems about achieving that goal of 5.5%. But you need to grow investment. Today, a number was mentioned for the growth of investment expected, 7.6%. And it's no bad. It's more than it used to be. But nevertheless, the accumulation rate is still very low in Russia, less than 20% of GDP. All the problems, all the cases of economic breakthroughs that we have seen worldwide are based on this rate at the level of 30%. And our monetary policy is the biggest area where we see problems. If we don't resolve this bottleneck, which is basically in the lack of credit or loans for this investment, we are not going to ever achieve those goals for the harmonious economic development. We need to grow our investment by about 15 to 20% a year. In order to do this, we need to use modern best practices. Unfortunately, our monetary authorities are providing conditions for the lending economy at a very high interest rate. You know that worldwide, for 12 years on end, the leading countries have been offering interest rates of 0.5%, 1%. In some countries, there's a factor of percentage rates, for instance, for priority projects, 0.2% annually, like in China, for instance. Whereas in this country, the percentage rates are higher than the profitability rates in the industry. So we are not sustaining the competition. So this lack, this dire lack of investment is also expressed in the fact that our domestic business doesn't feel a lot of support from the government and exports the money outside. Last year, a considerable flight of capital was happening. We need to create tools for targeted support or lending support of investment. And again, if you get loans for investment contracts, we have such tools, special investment contracts, then you bind the money in the modernization of production circle, and at the end of the day you create conditions to achieve a higher development rate. Unless we do that, and if we leave the economy with underused capacity and untapped resources, we are going to face a stagflation, because underutilized capacity bring about a decline in production environment, and that will bring about a new round of devaluation of the local currency, and going to the next level. So we just need to show that in the conditions of a structural crisis, which is experienced all over the world, we need to assure accelerated lending of investment, funding of investment. All countries are doing that. Over the past 12 years, the funding has grown all over the world. There are different constraints all over the world, but not the money-related ones. There's enough money to do that. So I wanted to bring this to your attention, that all the organizations that are offering funding unless our institutions are able to offer funds at low percentage rates, just like it's done all over the world, we are never going to achieve. Actually, the bank should have had dozens of times more assets than they have today. And it all could be done through attracting funds to that. So you can discuss programs a lot, you can discuss development projects, but unless we solve the problem of growing the investment activity by at least 5 trillion rubles every year of additional money in investment projects through targeted refinancing by the institutions, development institutions and development banks, so we're never going to reach the goals. Thank you, Sergey. There's one thing that you are never going away from. You're consistent, and I've been hearing you for many years, and I respect your point of view, even though as a former representative of the central bank, I can't say I fully agree with that. Well, we're now talking about the fight with inflation, and we're taking some controversial measures, such as removing export fees. But I think the best way to protect our economy from the inflation wave from other countries would be to use the tool that we have very effectively implemented in 1992, 1993, to add the higher rates for the exports, and to use this money for the imports, and so to use this money to foster import substitution and bring the inflation down through the growth of production of domestic goods. Thank you. Now a question to Sergey Starchak, who was representing Russia in the Council of the Bank. He was always supporting the drafting of programs for Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan and Armenia, which was done last year, and he was also consistently supporting the development of the Technical Development Fund. So what can you tell us about programs intended for smaller EAEU countries? How you see the usage of federal technologies system funds? Thank you for this multifaceted question. The reason for which I've always supported the idea of building the EDB loan portfolio in smaller economies are out there on the surfaces. On the one hand, it's a pragmatic approach, ensuring the credit portfolio should be diversified and not concentrated in the two largest economies of the region. That would be a standard policy of any lending organization, any credit organization, to avoid excessive concentration. On the one hand, and you're aware of my professional career path, but I took part in the events that are normally termed fostering international development. It so happened that I was entrusted to represent the Russian Federation in the conference on improving the efficiency in the Paris conference. Later, I was representing Russia in Addis Ababa when questions were discussed regarding the search for the sources of funding to achieve sustainable development goals. So when you're in the stream, it's whether you like it or not, you project what's happening in the world on the situation in your own country. In many ways, this predetermined that I would always say that it's not admissible that the economies of relatively small states are not getting enough funding. So it's inadmissible to focus only on cooperation that represent Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan. This is the policy that does not correlate 100% with the ideas behind the institution of EDB and its mandate. At the same time, colleagues, especially considering the previous intervention, I am forced to state one simple thing. Whatever we may say about a need to grow investment, we are always saying that these should be projects meeting banking practices. So they would only be included in the funding portfolio if they meet the criteria of international credit organizations. The economy of the Russian Federation, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, Belarus, unfortunately do not reproduce what is termed a bankable project. Well, there are some such projects, but not enough. And perhaps I can go from here to what's called the Fund of Technical Support, Technical Support Fund. This line of activity appears to require additional support and incentivization. The Technical Support Foundation is a tool to structure deals, to provide assistance to project initiators so that a project could turn into a bankable project from an idea. This task has always been on the agenda. And one striking thing, from my point of view, is in that the resources of these technical support funds, for the most part, are used. Well, the demand for them is not very high. I don't know why it so happens. The EDB Technical Support Fund has long become a serious structure, serious organization. I'm not going to give a number, but the experts who work with the bank will be able to give that number. But the same thing applies to the BRICS fund in the Shanghai institution. The fund is there, but there's no demand for it. And here I'd like to put a bridge to the best project that I'm aware of, because I was being asked, what do you have in your pocket as an example of the best way of using this specific resource. Maybe it's not altogether a technical support fund or goes beyond that, something broader than that, but I'm talking about the Northern Dimension Environmental Partnership. I think a lot of you have forgotten that this partnership exists, but the power of this tool was exactly in the fact that it was covering both the technical support and the source of funding. And most importantly, this tool was created based on multilateral participation of all the different institutions and organizations, both sovereign, multilateral development banks, and private companies, donor companies. So in order to understand what it is, let me give you two numbers. As part of this so-called non-nuclear window special fund, the TPC, about 180 million euros have been mobilized, but this money was enough to fund $1.5 billion worth of projects. The leverage was 10 to 1. So thanks to what does it happen? It happened because the initiators of these projects were local authorities located on the shores of the Barents Sea and Baltic Sea, and they had a specific and explicit interest as leaders of local communities. So the local authorities were interested in addressing very specific environmental programs. They were investing their own money, their own donor contributions. That gave a lot of positive energy. So over a year of the existing of this institution, 34 projects were endorsed, all of them quite small, but all of them played an important role in the development of local markets. To improve the welfare of the local population. And this is what harmonious social development is about. You have 1 minute. Yes, I'm wrapping up. What I'd just like to say is that if the technical support funds of EADB is going to go along these lines, I suggest that you take a look at the Northern Dimension environmental initiatives, use their experience and go forward just like they did. Thank you.
I must say I agree fully with Sergei, not because we were in the same class at the university, but also because I heard from many people about the benefits and the effectiveness of this Northern Dimension mechanism. So I suggest everyone would look deeper into that. Of course, we need to look at international standards, if there are such things, but in the lack of those, we should look at international best practices. Next is Artyom Novikov, head of the board, chairman of the board of the Russian Kyrgyzstan Development Fund. So what it is that we catch-up development would be ensured, and how Kyrgyzstan could speed up its economic growth and add to the potential of its economic growth. Thank you for this question, and I'm grateful to you, to the organizers, for this opportunity to join this important system-level panel on harmonious development. The Russian Kyrgyzstan Development Fund was set up in 2015, just before Kyrgyzstan joined the Eurasian Economic Union, and that was an institution whose purpose was to become the body that would enable a catch-up economic growth, bringing it closer to the standards of the Eurasian Economic Union. Over the 6 years of its operation, the fund has invested more than $400 million into the Kyrgyzstan economy through implementation of 3,000 projects for small and medium-sized businesses, as well as large-scale projects. There's something which is important for the future of our common economic space and mutual compatibility of our economies. The fund, in particular, supported sugar sector development projects. We reanimated 2 manufacturing facilities, and we involved more than 3,000 farmers who grow sugar beets and process that produce. In this way, Kyrgyzstan covered 100% of its demand for sugar without taking away any imports, without importing sugar from other member countries. A similar situation is developing in the textile industry. We succeeded in building a full-cycle cluster-based production, starting from the cotton growth farms to weaving and sewing. We used to import 1/3 of our consumption from China and Turkey. Now we cover all of our demand. The COVID year, last year, prompted us to speed up the pharmaceutical sector development. In particular, we're now providing 100% demand for injection drugs and inhale drugs. In this way, we ensure import substitution through the application of this mechanism, while at the same time protecting CIS market from third countries' imports to prevent imports or inflation. On the other hand, we contribute to the development of economic links within the Union. As regards incentives for social and economic development in general, we must be aware of the fact that investment institutions and funds should not compete with the commercial sector and take away projects or liquidity from them. We need to ensure complementarity and be conducive to their development. One example is the operation of the Russian Kyrgyzstan Fund on the Kyrgyzstan market. We managed to build a number of mechanisms for financing that, on the one hand, incentivize SMEs development through commercial banks by providing resources at minimum percentage of interest rate. On the other hand, we structure and systematize more larger projects directly through the Russian Kyrgyzstan Development Fund. The 6 years of experience of the fund's operation on the Kyrgyzstan market gave us the understanding that conventional lending instruments do not produce the needed impact on the economic development to the extent that we need it to grow. In this context, we came to understanding the fact that the resources of all development institutions should be consolidated. At the level of Kyrgyzstan, we're in the process of forming the coordination council that will bring together development funds, banks, bilateral funds such as Uzbek Fund, Kyrgyzstan Fund, and at the level of development institutions, this will enable the structuring of large-scale projects that will enable accelerated economic growth. On the other hand, we are aware of the existence of large players in the Union, such as the Eurasian Bank, that is expected to support large-scale projects as well. As for developing competences, again, another lesson learned is that development institutions should not only be conduits for capital, but also conduits for technologies and project innovations. So in the Russian Federation, so that Russian Federation will launch rockets and we will grow potatoes. We need to develop more technologies in Kyrgyzstan, and this is being done through a number of projects that we developed to create competences in stock markets development and lease operations now Kyrgyzstan's stock market operations are measured in dozens of millions of dollars. 1 minute left. Growing competences through development institutions, this is what helps us build new practices and build up experience for people involved in project implementation by hiring new project teams, new technologies and training programs, by structuring programs and hiring consultants in consistency with international standards. We can build more high quality projects, and this will make the competitive environment in Kyrgyzstan more conducive to growth, and this can be then extrapolated through across the borders to the rest of the Eurasian Union. Oh, this is what I talked about in the introduction, that is the need to integrate the efforts of development institutions. It seems that, based on what Artyom said, Kyrgyzstan is already doing that, and that deserves attention. My next question is to Pavel Zinkovich, Vice President of the Prosveshchenie Group of Companies. We all understand that one of the key aspects of harmonious social and economic development is exactly the education system. So the big question is whether or not education provides equal access or can provide sufficient quality of education. So what about the Russian Federation? What is your experience and how can you assist in developing a good education system? And this is very personal for me. When we worked with Tajikistan schools, we heard the price for a Russian language textbook that was asked, and we were shocked by that. Maybe you will give us some hope for price reductions so that these textbooks could be successfully produced and distributed in the Central Asian countries. Thank you very much. Well, I'm grateful for the invitation to this Congress and for the efforts of the organizers, particularly the EFSD, for giving this, making this emphasis on the educational system. I'm no longer a public official, so I can speak freely now. But of course, I was saying the same things to my colleagues in all those intergovernmental commissions where we are negotiating. And it's great that each of us responsible for a particular educational project can talk about figures and amounts. But if we want a common space or projects that are planned for decades ahead, this is impossible to do unless we tackle education properly. And it's not like we support the social areas, such as through social assistance, but we need education as a development factor. Education is about quality of life today and quality of human capital tomorrow. If we are to cooperate more economically, if we are to develop infrastructure and high-tech projects with decades of time horizon, unless we work properly with school children today, I have no idea how this will work out after years. So if we want integration processes to take place towards a common market, we need our youth, starting from secondary school and universities, to be educated within the same educational space. So unlike other integration cases all over the world, we have advantages because our education system has a common legacy. Of course, over the last 30 years, the national educational systems were developing in different modes. Some countries were more successful than others. And of course, the opportunities are different as well as resources. In this respect, the EAEU and the development tools such as EDB can really help level up the situations. And the situation with Tajikistan schools is just one example. Sergei Storchak, who is sitting here, my colleagues from EGB was asking me, how did it happen that we have any relation to this project? And I answered, Sergei and myself were taking the same flight, and we were discussing that, and he suggested we do this together, and this is how it happened. And this is a wonderful example of how such institutions can come together and jointly implement such projects as school construction and equipment. And there are many things we can do in this way. It's not only about supplies or textbooks, procurement. This alone will not address the problem. In fact, in Russia, textbooks are priced the same all over the country. And it's true that we have positive experience in mutual adaptation of textbooks and even mutual production of textbooks with countries of the Union. We have such experience with Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, and we have plans to do the same as a project with Tajikistan. So we take some world-class textbooks somewhere which are successfully used by schools, and we take those textbooks and adapt them to the national situation and standards. We have them translated into the national language, and then they are published in this way. We discussed such projects, and the EGB is ready to help us so that textbook supplies to schools could be financed. Last week we discussed it with Uzbekistan colleagues. We talked about enabling schools, such as helping them hire good staff, teachers. If we want to develop large-scale industrial or infrastructure projects, high-tech projects, we should start with schools. This is what Russia is doing and Moscow city is doing when students of 6th or 7th grade at high school are taking robotics classes or even things like medical education at the level of competence equal to university first year. And we are doing that through pre-university training, and we are ready to pack and repack those educational projects, adjusting them to the specific needs of CIS countries and EAEU countries. The educational system is very sensitive to degree of national sovereignty, and the agreements that we have should be finalized and formalized at the intergovernmental level. On the other hand, and we can come back to the recent example, 2 days ago Mr. Loginov was in Tajikistan, and they signed an agreement on schools, not only to build schools, but also that agreement covers the status of Russian teachers, or teachers who are Russian citizens working in Tajikistan. In Kyrgyzstan, we are starting the same. We started in Tajikistan in 1917. The first team of teachers commissioned there was a group of 30. Then in Kyrgyzstan in 2018 asked us for the same. And the next year, the first group of teachers was commissioned to Kyrgyzstan. There are many projects, and governments and countries need to support that, but we need a proper legal foundation for that. On the other hand, institutions, development institutions such as EDB and others give us a hand to help us with that. We have a huge potential. The very numbers are great, not just textbooks, but also in terms of accessible content. Internet and other communication capacities are growing, and each country has its particular policy in that respect. We are ready to share the content. We are ready to help the countries to train their teachers. So the mechanisms are already in place. We need to enable them to operate more effectively. It's not only the quality of education that needs to be improved, but we also need to put the solid foundation for everything that was described in the morning sessions. Any plans, any projects will not be realistic unless we put it right in the educational system. Thank you. Yes, life is changing, and in the previous system, after you graduate from the university, you could spend 40 years in the same employment position and then retire. Nowadays, as soon as you graduate, you start moving from job to job, maybe at least 5 or 6 times in your life, and you can even switch from one area of activity to quite another. You even change your profession. So it means that you have to learn all your life. It's lifetime education and training.
And I'll pass the floor to Andrei Shirokov, Executive Director at the European ESDF. Timo Maximov mentioned this today. How do you see the role of ESDF in this harmonious social development? What bottlenecks you may see, and how do you perceive the complementarity of the fund and the bank? Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, it's a very good question. The assistance of the government to remove bottlenecks is the major mandate of our fund, and here we can start with differentiating between several levels of such bottlenecks. One is about the geographic position of the small countries. It has both its advantages and also entails bottlenecks. For instance, another smaller country has exit to the sea. This, in fact, is an obvious bottleneck. The climate agenda has also started to affect the development in smaller countries. It started being felt in our work as well. The government is starting to pay serious attention to this in all areas of activity. Of course, agriculture as the most subject to the global warming, the energy industry, social environment, that requires additional funding, restructuring the business processes. And again, it's a bottleneck that arrived in our countries, regardless of their wish or will. As to the domestic factors, perhaps we should start with the remaining vulnerabilities of these countries to outside shocks, which of course affects the level of both domestic and foreign investment, because volatility in development does not add to the optimism on the investor side, and of course there are reasons to that. A goal of further diversification of the economies. Most economies in our smaller countries is not diversified enough. Artyom Novikov spoke about that, how they solved this problem at the level of individual projects and industries. But there are other roots to the problem, because one other problem in our countries that is still there is that government institutions are not developed enough. There are quite a lot of research on this, saying that countries with underdeveloped government institutions see about 40%, up to 40% of investment going into the sand. It's a big problem, and it's a priority for our fund as we are working with the governments. As a certain heritage of the Soviet Union, we have problems with the basic infrastructure in our countries. It requires not only development, but also recovery in many places. And here one can underline one specific trait of us as an organization. We're unique as a regional mechanism to do that, to address that. So about 11 years ago, a dual mandate was issued to us, and so removing bottlenecks in the infrastructure in the member countries is one of our two goals, because without this you can't speak about accelerated development. And as mentioned earlier, human capital is also, on the one hand, the biggest wealth of the country, but also it requires a lot of government effort to develop. In Central Asia, there's also an aspect related to large-scale natural population growth that requires additional investment on behalf of the government into human development. And another important thing that's being overlooked quite often is about divergence in development among the regions in the country. So when they're talking about the catching up development in our countries, the same problems exist within the countries. So when different regions of the country develop at different paces in different directions, that brings about huge disbalances in the economy, reduces the investment attractiveness of the country, and stand in the way for harmonious socio-economic development. So here one has to note, well, there's an indicator termed economic mobility of the population. It's how people are able to move from one region to another without losing the quality of life. In our smaller countries, there's a lot of work to be done to improve that. We're trying to help them within our possibilities. Like a grant window was opened several years ago that helps building projects to develop the social infrastructure in our countries. In the first place, healthcare, education, and governance, and things related to it. So these perhaps are the key bottlenecks that stand in the way of harmonious socio-economic development and convergence of our countries on this path. As to strategic development, it's already been noted here. As Timur Maximov said, a goal has been set for us to put together a strategy of the European Stabilization Development Fund for the coming period, and so we've already done a lot of work on these lines. We exerted a lot of effort on primary diagnostics and consultations with the governments of our countries to prioritize the tasks that are faced by our countries. Also, prioritizing the areas where the countries are requesting consultancy and technology support from us. This helped us to put together a single list of priorities. In many aspects, the countries are facing the same problems with management and governance. So the biggest focus is on developing the government institutions, helping the countries to build and improve the state finance utilization. Andrei, you have 1 minute. Yes. Also helping them to do tax administration and also to develop the basic infrastructure, because it's not only about the development of physical assets, but also the entire regulatory framework for them to be operated, because these things are closely intertwined. So we have worked out directions to implement those activities with each countries, and now, as Timur Maxim said, it has to be discussed with the top level of these countries, and political decision will be made. Thank you. So I'm hoping that at the next Congress you'll be able to talk about that in more detail, because there will be a lot of people interested in that after this strategy has been adopted. Yes, I'm hoping that the first results will already be there by that time. All right, I would like to thank everyone because we're out of time. Thanks to all speakers. I apologize for interrupting, but only in only for the sake of timekeeping. If you have any questions left, you can catch the speakers outside in the lobby. Thank you.